Hey adventurers, so today is going to be another book review. This is going to be for Tales from the Perilous Realm by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is his short story collection. This is fantasy, adventure, poetry to some degree. There's also a essay in here that I'll talk about towards the end of the review. So Tales from the Perilous Realm is J.R.R. Tolkien's collection of short stories, like I just mentioned. These are not directly connected to the Legendarium, other than one of them. Although everything he wrote does have some reference to Middle-earth or fairy in some way. But these are just stories that he told, stories that he wrote for his children, etc., things like that. To no one's surprise, I absolutely adored this book. I didn't read it front to back in the traditional sense. I jumped around a little bit. But the way that this book is written, you can actually do that. I started out with The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which are several poems, some of which are directly from The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, but some of them are not. Some of them are just stories that or poems that he wrote that are magical, that are whimsical. After that, I think, so let's see, after I read Adventures of Tom Bombadil, I think I'm pretty sure I went back to the beginning of the book and then read from there. And then once I came back to Tom Bombadil, I just skipped that section and continued on. I don't remember for certain. There may have been some other jumping around that I did, but I'm pretty sure that's what I ended up doing. Anyways, the stories that are contained herein are Roverandom, Farmer Giles of Ham, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, Smith of Wootton Major, and Leaf by Niggle. And then at the end there's one of Tolkien's most famous essays, which is on fairy stories, and that's at the end of the book. Each of these stories had something about them that just instantly drew me, or maybe not instantly, but that ended up drawing me into them, as I knew that they would. Of course, they're Tolkien, so I can expect that. They're all exceedingly Tolkien, if you know what I mean, and they're just expertly crafted stories. Roverandom reminded me a lot of The Hobbit. It's a very different story, a different intention behind its writing, but the tone is very similar. Farmer Giles of Ham reminded me a little bit of Roald Dahl, specifically the one that I'm thinking of is BFG, and it has a dragon. It's a very different story, nothing at all like that, but that's the sense of style, I guess, that I was getting from Farmer Giles of Ham, and it was very, very enjoyable. The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, as I already mentioned, is poetry. The first two of them are about Tom. They are adventures that he goes on. Let's see what they are real quick. There is, oh come on, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, and Bombadil Goes Boating. And then there's a whole bunch of other ones that are in there as well. But the rest of the stories are just whimsical poems that are just all very beautifully done. Tolkien absolutely has a way with words, and a lot of people like to say, oh, Tolkien's not the best poet out there or anything like that. And yeah, that's probably true, but he's still extremely skilled at poetry. So very, very well worth reading his poems as well. Smith of Wootton Major was completely different than anything I'd read or expected from Tolkien, and was just extremely vivid and ethereal. It's full of magic and wonder, and the story, I mean, it's very much a children's story to some degree. It's a fairy tale is what it is. It feels like a fairy tale. And then Leaf by Niggle, which is the last story, it's the most acclaimed of his stories, and definitely deserves its praise. I think that it's very, very well done. Far more thematic and philosophical in its story, and it actually reminded me a little bit of C.S. Lewis, and especially The Great Divorce, that story of his. Again, completely different stories, but there's some, I'm reminded of them. I'm not saying that they're anything alike, but I am reminded of one as I read the other. And just I understand why it's so acclaimed, and I think that it probably is one of his best stories, but it isn't my favorite. I think my favorite actually does go to Smith of Wootton Major. That one was just so different from anything that I was expecting, and just absolutely beautiful. In all of these, Tolkien's skill as a storyteller and as a wordsmith is just out in full force, just absolutely masterfully crafted and extremely beautiful to read. And then the book ends with his essay on fairy stories. I've heard a ton about this essay over my time as a reader, and since I first started reading Tolkien, and then since I've joined BookTube and stuff like that, I've just heard so much about it, and through that, I kind of knew a little bit about it before I went into it, but it's not really until you sit and read it in its entirety that you fully understand what Tolkien is trying to say. And I don't even know that I do fully understand all that Tolkien was trying to say here. Of course, this is where his discussions on subcreation and eucatastrophe are found, but as interesting as those were, I actually found, and maybe this is because I wasn't expecting this in here, but it was, I actually found his discussion on essentially subgenres is what stuck with me the most. He talks about what is a fairy story and how does it differ from so many other types of stories and stuff like that. And it's just that conversation that he has that is kind of the whole thesis or premise of the essay that he's writing. It's just fascinating, and the subcreation and the eucatastrophe conversations are as well. But I think because I've heard so much more about those sides of things from just the general discussion, and I hadn't heard anything about this what is a fairy story, I think that's why the what is a fairy story part of this essay appealed to me as much as it did. Anyways, I'm super glad to have finally read this book, although it took me far longer to get to and then to read than I wanted or intended. I've had this book for years, several years, probably 5+ years now. Maybe not that long, I don't know. But I've had this book for a while and wanted to read it since I started reading Tolkien. So it's taken me too long to get to it. But then when I did, I basically spent the entirety of 2023 reading this book. I started out early in 2023, when would it have been? It would have been January or February, maybe early March, that I read The Adventures of Tom Bombadil. But I allowed myself to take my time with it, and I'm glad to have done that, and I'm happy to have done that. And I ended up spending, like I said, the entirety of 2023 reading it. So it was absolutely worth the time that I spent reading it, and just some of the best stories you're going to read, some of the best short stories you're going to read. They're absolutely fantastic and a must-read for any Tolkien fan, for sure. Of course, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and Silmarillion are also must-reads, but this one, this is brilliant. I'm just kind of starting into exploring short stories and exploring some of the shorter fiction, novellas and stuff like that. Most of these are novellas, I guess, but they're fantastic. Tolkien's so good at them. So easily one of the best books I read last year. Did not make my number one. That was actually a surprise, but you'll have to go watch our top 10 books of 2023 video to find out the answer, where this sits. Anyways, thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.